Hello guys, what's up? I hope you all people are doing well and studying well. So, yesterday we covered the financial market, and today we will cover the fiscal system or fiscal policy. So, in any economy, there are three things are very important, like growth and development and inflation, and these things are controlled by either fiscal policy or the monetary policy. Fiscal policy is the one which is decided by the government, while the monetary policy is guided by the RBI. So what is mean by fiscal? It is very important to understand what is mean by fiscal policy. So fiscal policy means like how government manages is taxation policy and spending programs. So in general we will see like how the fiscal health of the economy is decided. So fiscal health of economy have two components, one is revenue and other is expenditure. In revenue there is two types again. So revenue receipt and capital receipt. Revenue receipt again divided into two types, like tax revenue and non-tax revenue. So tax revenues consist of two parts, we know, the direct tax and indirect tax. Direct tax is like income tax, while indirect tax is like GST. While the non-tax revenues like user charges, interest, receipts or dividends, profit, all this comes under the non-tax revenue. And in fiscal health, second is like expenditure. Expenditure also have two components, like revenue account expenditure and capital account expenditure. While the revenue also have two components, one is revenue and second is like capital receipt. So capital receipt again consists of two part, like recoveries from the loans. For example, like if center have given loan to states or any foreign countries, so whatever they get from that loans back, that is the recovery from the loans. And second one is like borrowing can be like internal borrowing or the external borrowing. And third one is like disinvestments, like if government is selling its shares in the whatever they is like if there is a public undertaking company, and if government is selling its shares, so whatever the proceeds come, that comes under the disinvestment. So then expenditure have revenue component and capital account expenditure. While in revenue receipt, the revenue receipt neither creates the liability nor the asset creation, it just revenue. While the while the capital receipts they create the liabilities on the government and leads to the decrease in asset of the governments. Means like if capital receipt, if government is like borrowing from other country or any other sources na, so government have to pay back, that is the liability. And it leads to the decreasing assets, means like they have to pay back, means like they can't create like permanent assets or like this. That's simple. Then article 100 112, it talks about managing the revenue and other expenditure, but doesn't speaks about the capital expenditure or the capital, it is not explicitly mentioned. So second part is like capital sorry expenditure. So expenditure have two components, revenue account expenditure and capital account expenditure. So revenue account expenditure, it doesn't create any assets, we know that. And it consists of like interest payments, defense, whatever then subsidies, whatever the money given for like food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, or this, or the money used for the public administration, or grants given to the states. Remember, grants comes and given to states comes under the revenue account expenditure. Then capital account expenditure, here the loans given, then expenditure for the asset creation in terms of the infrastructure, all this comes under the capital account expenditure. Here the grants given to states are the revenue expenditure, while the loans given to the states are the capital expenditure. Remember, this is a MCQ, remember this. Then there, now we have seen these, all these types are like revenue and revenue receipts and expenditures. So if there is any, if revenue is less and expenditure is more, then it lead to deficits. So there are various types of deficit, means like receipts are less than the expenditure leads to the deficit. The types of deficit, there are like these following types, like revenue deficit there, monetizer deficit there, effective revenue deficit there, fiscal deficit there, primary deficit there, and budget deficit. So one by one let's see all. First one is like revenue deficit. Revenue deficit means like where the revenue expenditure minus the revenue receipt leads to the revenue deficit, means like revenue receipt is less than the expenditure. So government flags mainly these whatever the revenue expenditure, it leads to the our government spend them for the government flagship schemes. so leading to the revenue deficit. Then second one is like effective revenue deficit. It was introduced in FRBM Act 2012. So revenue deficit means like whatever the means main revenue, and from that grants given to the state for the creating capital asset is subtracted, it leads to the effective revenue deficit. Means from revenue deficit whatever the money used for the asset creation, it gives us to effective revenue deficit. Then fiscal deficit total receipts minus total expenditure leads to the fiscal deficit. So revenue receipts and non-debt creating capital receipts like loan recovery, all disinvestments na, they comes under the total receipts. So FRBM Act was amended in 2018 to keep the fiscal deficit target 3% by 2021. Then primary deficit means like fiscal deficit minus the interest payment. Like if government have taken loan from other countries or anything, they have to pay interest. So from fiscal deficit, if we minus or subtracted the interest payment, it leads to the primary deficit. Then there is monetizer deficit. Then if like I told you, like deficit, there are various mechanism to finance the deficit. So if government is borrowing from RBI and RBI financing that deficit by the printing the fresh money, it lead to the monetizer deficit. And last one is like budget deficit, like total budget receipt also minus total budget expenditure lead to budget deficit, but this concept is discarded since 1997. Now we have covered the all deficit. Now let's understand what is meant by deficit financing. So we have something deficit means like our revenue is less than the our expenditure. So whatever the money that we needed, we have to finance them through the deficit financing. So like expenditure is less and expenditure receipt is less and expenditure more, so deficit that is financed by either RBI means like printing money, or this, or the we can also borrow from like foreign investment like FDI, FI, or government can also borrow from market, either internal market or external market. It all helps in the deficit financing, but if it is not controlled, then it lead to inflation, crowding out for the private players. We are going to understand what later on what is meant by crowding out for the private player, and also it leads to affect the investment in the economy. So it is necessary here to understand how much we can finance the deficit. It is not like we keep on financing deficit and the government is spending like without any accountability. All this, it never happens. There should be something accountability. So how can be the healthy financial deficit? So too much leads to the inflation or financial destabilization. If financial deficit in small amount is good if it is used prudently and rational, within rational limits, like using the FRBM Act, all this, or borrowed money used for the productivity or asset creation. So it depends on two things mainly: extent of borrowing, how much we are borrowing, and second was like end of borrowed money means the end use, how you are using that money for any asset creation or any other productive use. So then fiscal deficit to limited extent helps in the growth and welfare also, but if it too much then lead to the sovereign debt crisis or the intergenerational equity is damaged. What is meant by intergenerational damage? Intergenerational equity damaged means like if one generation or this one generation mean like this generation have taken so much debt or so much loan, but next generation have to pay that, means like they are by just passing their debt to the next generation, so that intergenerational equities get damaged. Then let's understand what is mean by fiscal. So we have understood fiscal deficit financing. Now we understand the fiscal stimulus. For fiscal stimulus we have to understand like slowdown means if there is less demand in economy, so leading to the slowdown. So falling down demand, so there need to be the Keynesian solution. Keynesian solo. So borrowing means the here government borrow and spends, so it lead to the ultimately increasing the money in the hands of public. So if there is more money in the hands of public, it ultimately creates the demands. So now let's understand some related terms related with the fiscal system. So twin deficit, even economic survey have mentioned so many times, and it is always in news, what twin deficit. So what is meant by twin deficit? When fiscal deficit and current account deficit are together, it leads to the twin deficit. Then what is fiscal consolidation? Fiscal consolidation means like strengthening the government. strengthening the government finance by the increasing revenue. There are I told you fiscal system or fiscal health are two components like revenue or revenue receipt and expenditure. Means like receipts versus the expenditure. So they have to decrease the expenditure while increase the revenue. So the revenue increased by the taxation while the expenditure decreased by the decreasing expenditure on subsidy or etc programs. Then steps taken for fiscal consolidation, government have taken following steps like revenue reform like GST, rationalization in tax, then exemptions, tax exemption should be avoided, then efficiency in the tax collection, then capital reform. In this the government have started disinvestment programs and privatization. Then there is also expenditure rationalization or reform like rationalizing the subsidies, all this. Then state, what is meant by state development loans? So these are the loan raised by the state for the, means like they raised for the state but with the help of the RBI, and they are like government securities. But there is a difference like central government can issue both treasury bills and bonds while state government only bonds, and they are eligible for the statutory liquidity ratio or liquid adjustment facility. Then zero based budgeting. What is mean by zero based budgeting? Means like instead of counting like next budget or starting from like whatever the earlier, if there is Swachh Bharat Mission program, if government have invested like 500 crore last year some any program, or but very next year na, they will not start from 500 crore, they will start from zero. Means like whatever the program earlier done have all this, they will evaluate it properly and then they will start the expenditure. So this was first time taken in 1987, and every year budget making starts from the base as a zero. However, the use of zero based budgeting have some like drawbacks like human development programs or the poverty elevation programs or employee generation na, they have limited role or they are not considered. Then what is meant by crowding out? Yeah, like we had seen earlier, crowding out is there if there is a excessive deficit financing. So what is meant by crowding out? See, in simple term understand like excess government borrowing. If there are few money and government borrowed all this money, so there will be very less money for the private sector, so it will lead to increasing. See that liquidity will be decrease in market, also the interest rate will increase. So private player don't have enough money to buy, so ultimately leading to crowding out. Means they will move the out of the crowd or they will leave the market because of two things like there will be less liquidity and high interest rates. Then small savings. So there are example of small savings like post office monthly income schemes or the time deposit or national savings scheme or kisan vikas patra, all these are the example of small saving. But we have seen many times small saving schemes are always in news. Why they are like so much popular or why they are called as a small saving? uh, so first understand that because the savings is in very small amount, that's why it is called as a small saving, and they help in government financing as government use them as a source for borrowing. And they had given so much concession, tax concession, all these to attract the small investors, and interest rate is also high, that's why they are very much popular among the public. And they are deposited into public account of the Indian management of, means they are in public account, so they are which are managed by all funds. Then national, there is a national small saving fund in the public account under which they are managed by Ministry of Finance under the article 283 1 section of the constitution. Then we will understand what is meant by public debt. So we have seen that government liabilities means like we have seen that deficit finance, that finance, while understanding that financing there are two components, one is like RBI can finance or other is like government. So government can finance through various mechanism, it leads to government liabilities like government have to pay back now if they are borrowing from someone, so it is like liability. So there are two types of debts like public debt and other is other liabilities. So public debt is like against the consolidated fund of India, or other liabilities they are against the public account, and for examples are like provident fund or small saving deposit, all this. But the public Public debts, they are of two types, like internal debt or external debt. Internal debt means like they are borrowed from the internal borrowing means, and while the external debts mean like within country they are borrowed like internal debt, while the external debt like borrowing outside the country, include like even private sector borrowing also too. So internal borrowing or within countries of two types, like borrowing from the market like issuing securities, all this, or the from borrowing from RBI like loan or the printing fresh money. Then there is like annual publication of India's external debt, a status report by the Department of Economic Affairs, and it is by Ministry of Finance. Then what is meant by debt to GDP ratio? So public debt in related to GDP, it is called as a debt to GDP ratio. So it's if that is debt versus GDP, that is debt to GDP ratio, and it depends on various factors like size of economy, growth rates of the economy, how it is growing, or tax buoyancy of the economy, or nature of the government expenditure, or populistic whatever the schemes government like launching, or and then internal and versus the external debt ratio also there. Countries sovereign rating, that depends on this ratio like debt versus GDP, and it is I think now 89% something. After COVID it is increased, and our NK Singh committee on consolidated fund, that FRBM act they have given target, it is of like 40% for the center, means they have given target like we have to bring it for 60% and 40% by the center and 20% by the states. Then what is mean by fiscal drag? So if economy is experiencing inflation, so it automatically stabilizes, that is the fiscal drag. What is how it stabilizes? Let's understand. Like if there is high inflation, so wages will increase, means high inflation, so workers all these will get the good amount of wages. So if wages are increasing, they have to pay higher taxes. So if they are paying high taxes, their disposable income will again decrease, so it will again lead to the less demand, so it automatically stabilize the inflation. Then fiscal cliff, what is meant by fiscal cliff? So if it is a sharp cutting down of the some of the tax concession given, so that is called as the fiscal deficit, fiscal cliff. So with this we have covered the topic of fiscal uh, health or fiscal system. So tomorrow we will come with another new topic. So thank you for joining with us. So, please share and like and subscribe and share with your friends too, so they can easily understand economy. Thank you so much.